Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. We got a storm coming in, so I figured I'd get out on the river and do a little bit of fishing before the rain comes. Only get out for like, I don't know, maybe an hour, but I had an opportunity. Needed to relieve a little bit of stress, and this is how I do it. So I wanted to get out and fish a little bit. We'll see if I catch anything. But I did want to give you guys some tips on squarebills. You know, this is a great time of year to fish a squarebill. It's a really good way to generate some strikes. And I got to tell you, I think there's a few things that anglers can do to maximize not only the number of bites they get, but as well as their landing percentage. So I've got three things I just want to address really quick with you that I think will help you catch more fish. I know for me, they make a big difference, so I think they will for you as well. Before I get into these three tips, I want to remind you guys that I'm starting to do one-on-one sessions with Fish the Moment. You can sign up through the link that's in my video description. Basically, it's a one-on-one call where we can dissect your local lakes. We can dissect a lake you're going to on vacation. It's almost a lake breakdown, only you get to ask me about whatever you want. So we could cover a lot of different topics during that 1 hour phone call. So check those out, the 1 hour sessions. It's a really fun way for me to interact with you guys, because you know, it's really nice to be able to do it through the comments, but it's a lot more fun to do it through like a Zoom call where we can see each other face to face and actually talk through things. So check those out. I'll put the link in my video description. And if you want to talk about squarebills, we can talk about squarebills. So I've got three things here that I'd really like to address. The first is potentially the most important, and that has to do with the rod. You know, in my opinion, the rod is so essential to landing fish and getting the correct hookup percentage. So what you want to go with, in my opinion, I'm not saying you got to, but I think you want to go with something that's got a very soft tip to it, a very good parabolic bend. I use, you know, a custom rod that I built from MHX. In this case, this is the CB905, so it's a blended rod. It's a fiberglass composite rod, so it's got backbone in the lower end, but then in the upper end, it's got more soft tip to it. So what that does is when those fish go to suck that bait in, they can suck it further into their mouth. They can get a better mouthful of hooks, which leads to a better hookup percentage. So to me, using the right rod is critical. If I were to put a squarebill on one of my other, you know, let's say my do it everything rods, they're just good, straight up 7.3 medium heavy action rods that you can use for almost anything, you'll be able to throw the squarebill just fine on it. The problem is they're so fast and they're so sensitive that you end up pulling the bait away from the fish in a lot of cases when you're throwing a squarebill. So what ends up happening is, you know, you may skin hook the fish, which means they jump and get off. You may fight them halfway back to the boat. And the problem is they just were never allowed to get the bait fully in their mouth. And that's where I really like a blended rod like the CB905. It just makes a really big difference, and I truly believe that. The second thing that you can do to increase your catch rate is to change up your stop and go. The traditional stop and go is reel, stop, reel, stop, reel, stop. The problem with that is it does not allow your bait to come up off the bottom. When you stop it for just a second, you're stopping your bait, but it's not actually rising. So it's a good way to generate a strike if the fish is right on the bottom. But I'm telling you guys, if you add in some longer pauses, throw it out, reel it down to the bottom, and then just let it float. You want your bait to come up a foot or two off the bottom, so you reel it like you would normally, and let it rise up. A longer stop and go is something that will generate more strikes. The reason for that is if you've got a big boulder or a big laydown that's down there and you only kill it for a second, you're not letting your bait rise up to get to the top of that rock or the top of that boulder where there could be a fish sitting. So you actually could be bringing your bait underneath those fish. So in my opinion, I think you want to try a little longer stop and go. Give it a second, let it float up. You want your bait to come up a foot or two off the bottom at times. I'm not saying you got to do it all the time, but mix it into your retrieve. And I think you'll see that from a traditional stop and go that makes a big difference when you're throwing a squarebill. The third thing that I think you want to take into account is your line diameter. Now, I know a lot of people have various opinions on this. I think, you know, if you want to use fluorocarbon, that works great. If you want to use monofilament, that works great. I know some guys that throw square bills on braid. Now that's not something that I necessarily prefer to do for the similar reason to number one. The braid doesn't have any stretch at all, and therefore you're pulling the bait away from the fish a lot more than you'd like. But if you want to throw braid, that's fine, because this tip works for all three types of line. And in this case, I'm throwing fluorocarbon. But what I think you need to try is to go down to a very small line diameter size. Now, when I say very small, I'm not talking 6 pound, although you could do that. But I'm talking more about that 10 pound range. You know, most people will throw square bills on 15, 17, sometimes even 20. But I really think that if you drop down to 10, sometimes down to 8, or at least 12 pound, what that's going to do is it allows you to maximize the diving depth out of your crankbait. So if your bait normally dives 3 feet on 15, if you go with 10, you'll probably get it down to 4 feet. And that can make a really big difference in terms of deflecting off that one rock or that one stump that that fish is hanging on in 4 feet of water. Whereas if you brought it by with your 15 or 17 pound test, you may never have hit that stump because you weren't getting deep enough. The other benefit to lighter line is you get much better rise out of your bait. So when you stop your bait or it deflects off a bait, it rises more because at that point it has less drag that that line is creating in the water. Therefore, the bait can move faster, which creates more reaction strikes. And the last reason I think lighter line is better is because you get better action out of your bait. So when I'm moving this guy through the water, it will wiggle, 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 but it wiggles greater on light line versus heavy line. Heavy line will dull that wiggle motion and create a tighter wobble. Now, maybe there's times you want a tighter wobble, and therefore, maybe that's what you're going for. Maybe there's times you're just fishing around absolutely giant fish or extremely heavy cover, and you need that heavier line. I'm not saying you gotta do it all the time, but like in my case here, I'm just going down the riverbank. There's a lot of submerged logs, a lot of submerged trees. I'm fishing from 0 to 4 or 5 feet of water. And I just want to get my bait down, moving as well as it can, and creating a lot of deflection to create those reaction strikes. And therefore, there's no reason for me necessarily to go with really heavy line. Because the truth of the matter is, I'm using really sharp hooks, and all I have to do is apply pressure onto that fish. I don't have to wail on them. I don't have to crank them to the boat really hard to make sure that they come in like you would maybe with a jig or a Texas rig. With a crankbait, a lot of times I just apply pressure and I just reel them slowly into the boat because I know my hooks are sharp enough, and I don't know a lot of times where that fish is hooked. If they're hooked on the outside of the cheek, I have a much better chance at landing them if I play them out slowly. So those are 3 things, guys, that I think people can do with a square bill to dramatically increase the number of bites that you get, as well as your landing percentage. Because as you know, getting bites is great, but if you're not putting them in the boat, it doesn't really matter that much. So you need to have both of those working together. And I think that these 3 tips make a difference. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, share it on your social media pages, and stay tuned. We got another video coming out tomorrow.